What's up for everyone? We're excited you got me to bring you guys another episode, just Life by Design. Today's episode is going to be with Chris Bello. Okay, Chris, I'm going to also have all your links and stuff just linked in the description below, which is amazing. Chris has a very successful podcast, by the way. You guys should actually subscribe to it. You should go check him out. I'm going to leave a lot of his links at the bottom. It's Chris Bello. His Instagram here, so you can actually see it. It's going to be Chris Bello underscore. You should be able to see it just like that.
Appreciate it. Yep.
Uh, he's had Dean Graziosi on his podcast. He's had just a lot of giant hitters. You get me? And, you know, my podcast is starting off, so I wanted to bring Chris on. You get me? And I know there's a lot of people that probably want to start podcasts themselves. Chris has also made a lot of money in real estate. He's always helping families throughout pretty much all the United States. You get me? He's very big in self-education. So he's a trusted person. This is a guy that you actually want to go to. He has a good code of conduct, you get me, on how he carries himself and everything based off what I was able to see, which is amazing. And all the
Thank
episodes
you.
just being genuine with everybody that we've had on. Today we have Chris. Thank you so much for coming on, Chris. I'm honored to have you on, honestly. Very happy to have you. Is there like maybe something that you might want to be able to share that maybe like your story would be like a good frame set? How maybe how you started off, how you are where you're at like now, and then you get me what where you're gonna be, and then I'll ask like a couple of questions here and there, and like that, like like
Yeah,
if
for sure.
almost like if you were to write like a book, but like in a timeline, highlights. If that makes any
Yeah, thank you
sense.
for having me on here. I'm happy to share the story. So, the story that I tell people, and I think a lot of people could resonate. I went to school, I went to college, joined a couple of clubs, National Honor Society, like Hispanic Student Union. There were a few things that I did along the way, and I just kind of just dabbled. I never really knew what I wanted to do. I kind of liked playing the drums, but like I didn't really have a whole lot of passions other than like playing music sometimes and exercising, playing some sports. And so I kind of was like floating through life, got a college degree, got a day job, worked in oil and gas. And I was like 3.5 years in. And I started to just think like, man, is this the rest of my life? Cause I can't stand this. I'm driving 45 minutes each way to and from work. I'm sitting there at the office from 8. It's not even a 9 to 5. Realistically, it's like an 8 to 5 plus 2 hours to commute in traffic in Houston. And I was just not satisfied. Yeah, I finally was getting paid, like 80 grand a year or whatever. I was pretty satisfied with that. Like that was more money than I ever made. Previously, I had worked as a server and stuff and like push carts at a grocery store when I was 17 and 18. But I finally had the money thing, that box checked, but now I had no time freedom. So I started to get a little antsy. And that led me to quit the job, pursue my own path, try a few things out. And then eventually I landed up in real estate. I kept hearing, wealthy people, 98% of them got that way through real estate. So I was like, man, how do I get into real estate? How can I learn about this and really jump into the industry? Got started with the wholesaling team. They do like off market investments. And then a year later, I got my real estate license. And of course, I started the podcast as well to document the journey. And fast forward a few years, I'm in this awesome space. I'm closing deals virtually, completely remotely. I moved to Colorado just for an adventure. I've got a snowboard in the corner. I can go anytime that I want. And so I've created this life by design. I saw that and I was like, ooh, I love that phrase because I literally could do whatever I want. It's a Thursday that we're recording this on. I just got back from the gym. I'm about to go get a massage in like an hour after this. So really, I'm living life on my own terms, right? So hopefully that gives like the timeline from getting the college degree to getting the dream job that ended up not being a dream job to a few years later, like having created this life that I actually enjoy living.
How was it like when you started? I guess uh, the real estate when it comes to being able to just do the wholesales. To be honest with you, and then with the podcast, it's like how did you start? Like a question for you because I actually have 3 properties that I'm sitting on right now. One of the reasons why I took up the D2D role now is that I could pretty much just find a lot of properties knocking like doors with
Yeah.
like solar and like just helping families. And one of the beauties of that is that I used to do that before when I was at Vivint, like a while back. A lot of the guys in the industry are just there's a lot of very kind people in the industry um, that are just there. You get me that I've been able to meet. And when I went from Vivint to the solar job now, there's always like burnt properties that you find, you get me, or like mold damage or just abandoned houses.
Yeah. It's a great lead source or lead generating strategy. Like you accidentally happen upon a house that could be a good wholesale deal.
While just you get me knocking door to door, you get me qualifying homes for solar
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
the benefits of that. So it's like when you get like let's say like a when you find a property and like it's like a fire burnt property or a mold property, does it matter how much they owe on the house actually sometimes when it comes to you get me when you call them and then you start negotiating and then selling it to the buyer, the cash buyer.
Yeah, it's pretty important what they owe because if they just bought the house and they got a loan on it, they bought it like a year ago, they're not going to have enough equity. Like, just an example, say the house is, I'm just using like Houston numbers. I know markets are different everywhere, but say the house was worth
Sure.
$200,000 and now it's got 80,000 in damage from like mold or fire or whatever the case may be, flood, and they didn't have insurance. And they still owe, I mean, if they didn't have insurance and they still owe like 180,000 on the mortgage, and you need to offer 100K, that would mean that they need to bring $80,000 to be able to close, which like most people don't have that just sitting in the bank account, especially someone who just bought their first house a year or two ago. So it does matter. And that's why with wholesaling, it really works. And a lot of people target people who have high equity, older people who've been in that house for 60 years, they paid it off 30 years ago. They own it free and clear. All they're paying for is taxes. And so they have more motivation to sell if they have a house that needs work and they're like, okay, whatever, I don't care, just pay 100K for it, that's fine. The house could be worth 200K, but they value speed and convenience because they don't owe anything on it. Like if you give them 100K and they owe it free and clear, they're going to get 100K. If you offer 100K and they owe 90K, they're only going to make 10, right? So the equity does matter in terms of like how good of a deal you can get and if you're able to help people with a wholesale transaction.
Is that usually like a barrier, like off your experience? Because I know you've done a ton of homes. You get me. This would actually be um before I, throughout life. Most of the stuff that I've just focused on developing would just be like sales skills. So I know
Yeah.
you've done a ton of you get me like real estate deals and stuff, and you're always into self education and self investing. So it's just like when you're in those environments, you get me, and the experience that you've had, what has your experience been? I guess sometimes where it's like when you're working with families, I know sometimes you help them list it. I know sometimes you get me, it might not be the best option for them, and then you're the expert, you get me, and you're a trusted source that they could actually go to. So because of that, what are some like ways that you could share when a lot of the time you find like a home and sometimes you get me the person whether they want to sell it a bit quicker because they have a new job out of state, right? They got a promotion and you know or whatever their case might be. It's how often do you bump into like the equity and then them having to put something up, or is there like a way around that? Do you um yeah, like is there like a way around that sometimes you get me, and then the cash buyer you get me having interest in the property because it has a lot of potential for them in their favor highly.
Yeah. So what I've seen, a lot of people who do wholesaling do only wholesaling and they make the cash offer, say they offer 100K and the seller's like, hell no, I'm only going to take 150. That's my bottom line. That's like too big of a difference. So in those cases, the wholesale company may be like, hey, I'm going to refer you to a realtor. They can help you list this on the property and you're going to make more money. And then sometimes there's the realtors who just do on market stuff. Like they don't know what to do with a wholesale deal. They don't want to put that on their name and have like listings of a house that looks like a haunted house on their history, because now it kind of hinders, they're not able to go into those higher price point homes, the luxury markets, if they're showing all these like tear down houses, so there's kind of people who think both ways. But for someone like in my position who has done wholesaling and now has a real estate license, I can just work it both ways. I can have a conversation, approach it as a problem solver, and just casually ask the person, so why are you guys selling? Oh, okay, you haven't made payments in 3 months. There's probably motivation there. They lost their job. There's a medical illness that's sucking up all their money and they just sell this thing because they're about to lose it. That's a perfect scenario. And then you're like, well, how much do you owe on the house? Right. You just ask it, just like, don't, it's not a personal question. It's like, I need to know how much you owe, whether or not the cash offer is going to work for you. And either it makes sense or it doesn't. but speed is very important in those situations. And if they're like, oh, I'm good, I don't need to sell it, I kind of just want to see what I can get for it, I'd rather make the most money, I'm willing to wait. If they start saying those things, that's where you're like, okay, well, hey, here's the cash offer. It's probably too low for you. You're probably going to be like, I'm never going to take that. And I understand. And they're like, yeah, that's way too low. I'm never going to ever take that. Right. So you can kind of get a good feel on how motivated are they and what's their payoff amount. Are they willing to accept the cash offer? And if they're not in a tight situation, if they're willing to wait for the highest possible amount, kind of push them towards the listing. So I can work either way. And sometimes it just depends. Do they want to close in a week? That's going to be the cash offer. Are they willing to wait for a month for someone who is going to finance the deal with a conventional loan? And for those loans too, the house can't need a whole lot of repairs. So if it's in like terrible condition, they either have to fix it up to get a conventional loan on the property for a buyer, or they're going to have to do a cash offer. So you really kind of weigh the options like, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I can find you a buyer at 170 grand, but you're going to have to put $15,000 in repairs. Are you willing to do that? Usually they're like, I want to sell it as is.
Okay. And then when it comes to the equity, a lot of the time, let's say the house is in, let's say it's just like a burnt property or something, or like a mold damaged property or like an abandoned one. There's just so many different situations. There's like divorces as well, and like tax liens. I know you've probably come and done deals with
Oh
all of
yeah.
them already.
Yeah.
Um,
Divorces are
I'm
tough because people are like upset at each other.
yeah. It's like I just want to sign with Chris. And I'm like, you know what? You made a very wise decision because Chris is the real deal. So, how often do you bump into pretty much, you get me, when you find like properties that are in, let's say, that they owe money on it? That's an easy like way to, that's an easy fix, right? You could just go around that like very seamlessly, where it's just like a lot of the time they themselves would, for example, just easily be able to take like a cash offer, um, that is, let's say for example, let's say the market is like 300K, but they owe like 40, 50K on the house. The buyer sometimes would be okay, just paying that difference. They would just have to take like a lesser amount, or like, how does, I'm sure that's more common than not, right, in the industry, when people like all cash on their house and then they want to sell it and then they have that, and it's just right.
Exactly.
Can,
Yeah. So there's a payoff
please,
amount
if you
typically.
please.
So if somebody has owned it free and clear, like say they bought it a million years ago and they, handed down the house and no one knows anything other than the taxes every year, they're going to have more flexibility because they can literally sell it to you for 5 grand and they still keep 5 grand. But for most people, say they bought the house 5 years ago, they got a 30-year mortgage on it. They've made some payments, stuff like that, but there's still a payoff amount. So that's just going to be something that the bank gives you like a payoff statement. So let's say the market has gone up, like the last couple of years have been insane. The market has appreciated a ton. So even if they bought the house at like 300K last year and now it's worth 400K, their mortgage may be 280K. Like they may have paid down 20K with their down payment and the payments they've made on it. So they're able to sell it for 400,000, pay off the 280,000 they owe the bank, and they still get to keep the difference, which is like quite a big amount of money. 100K profit if you're looking at buying it at 300K, selling it at 400K, minus the realtor fees or the cash offer or whatever. So that's how it would work. Either if you've got a conventional buyer or a cash buyer, let's say they owe 50,000 on the mortgage and the offer is 100, the bank's going to get $50,000. The sellers are going to make $50,000, whether it's cash or a loan. So that payoff amount just gets covered because that's what's owed to the bank, and the rest is kept by the seller. So hopefully that kind of answers the question.
I think it did. I'm gonna rewind it, by the way, just in case.
Yeah, you just got to listen to it over. I know it's kind of confusing, but if you do a couple of transactions, just know that like the sellers get what they want, the bank gets what they want, and you're able to actually get the buyer what they want, whether or not you're the buyer.
Okay, perfect. And when it comes to like, let's say, let's share, like your podcast, like I have so many questions on like wholesale, just because I'm finally sitting on a couple of properties, which is amazing. When it comes to like your podcast, pretty much, how did the idea, like, I guess, hit you, and then from like one episode you were able to just like scale it so much, because you have 1.3 million downloads as of like up to date at this point because I might be dating it, you get me, while we're making this. So it's like how are you able to like seed it from like an idea? Like how did that happen? Like from the idea and then like your process. And maybe you could teach people like a little bit about like um some of the insights of and nuances that they could do that they're very fairly easy, but most people just don't typically do them or anything that stands out. That's a little bit different that they might not have known.
Yeah, so I listened to a lot of podcasts. I found myself, even when I worked in oil and gas, I was constantly listening to podcasts and taking notes. And then I found a few podcasts that I'm like, 50 episodes in, just thinking, this podcast isn't even that great. I was always, I guess, a decent communicator and speaker, and I was doing stuff like Toastmasters to improve my speaking. And I was always a little bit monotone, but I could at least speak clearly and get my message across. But my feedback was always like, oh, it was good, Chris, but you're just monotone. And so even being monotone, not to like pat myself on the back too much, but I was like, I think I could make my own podcast because I want to communicate my thoughts and ideas, document the journey. So honestly, I just started, right? I didn't know what I was doing. I was using a lapel mic. I was recording it in my car because that was the only quiet place in my house. My dog was always barking or cats barging in the room, or the TV was on or the washer and dryer, right? So I would record it in my car and with a lapel mic into the voice memo app of my phone. And that's how I got started. It was definitely the $5 startup when it comes to the podcast. And even now I have a ring light, a USB webcam and a microphone, maybe $200 for all of these things. And we're using Zoom, which is free unless you have the paid plan. I have like $15 a month plan. So you can get started very, very quickly and just, it evolved, right? At first I took a million notes. I read it word for word. Somebody left me feedback saying, man, I like your idea, but it sounds like you're reading to me. This isn't an audio book. And it hurt, but I'm like, that's true. I'm sitting here reading my notes word for word. That's not a podcast. So there's no emotion in it. So I stopped using notes. I started getting more natural, not needing to even have bullet points. I can just talk about a topic for 15 minutes without any issues. But at first I'm like, I need everything written down. I don't know what to write about, right? And then it evolved to interviewing and talking to guests and getting on other shows like we are here now. And as you do more and more, I think I'm at like 330 episodes. You get better every
Wow.
single time, right? I'm way better at 330 than I was at episode 3, where I'm like, hey, welcome to the podcast. Today I'm talking to, now I'm like, all right, today we're gonna talk about how to make 25 grand in a day and like, how you can change your life in 6 months or whatever. So you can kind of just tell the energy
Right.
transfers better now than it did earlier. And just consistency, man, that was the secret. I can't think of a hack or a tip or a trick on how I got there. It was just doing an episode every week and then increasing it to 2 episodes a week. And that's how it progressed. And here we are now. I've interviewed big guests like Dean Graziosi, Billie Jean is marketing, Dan Fleischman, and I've got a lot of big guests coming in the pipeline as well for 2022. And it's just like clockwork. I don't even think about it. I just look at the calendar. My podcast manager books all my guests for me. So I'm like, oh, that's cool. I'm talking to some big shot on Thursday, and I don't even know about it anymore until it happens.
How did you systemize it like that pretty much where it's like, my God, it's so amazing. Like when you grew your podcast, like you have it everywhere. I'm guessing, right? Like I have
Yep.
mine just on YouTube right now. I've had other people tell me you should put it on Spotify or like Apple Music, or like the Apple Podcasts. I'm sure it's probably easy. It's just like you make an account and you just start uploading the content, right? Yeah.
Yeah, super easy. So I have a hosting platform. There's different ones out there, but I just literally started off with Libsyn, libsyn.com. And they're a hosting platform. And you can just, like, I actually just started off with audio and then I added YouTube like a year later because I'm like, man, I'm already having the conversation on Zoom. Why don't I just record the video? So for you, you're already recording the video.
It's
You
doing it
can just
backwards from you.
convert an
Like,
MP3 file the other way, right? Yeah, just plug that into Libsyn and it pushes it out. Once you connect all your podcasts to like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio, all those different things, you literally just upload it to the hosting platform and it pushes it out to everywhere else. And this may be an old stat, but I remember hearing that 80% of people listen to podcasts on Apple Podcasts. That may have changed because I know Spotify has like taken on Joe Rogan as, Joe Rogan's on like Spotify only now, which is a big deal for podcasts. So Spotify may have claimed more podcast share, but I'd say between Spotify and Apple, that's probably like 90% of the platforms people use to listen to podcasts. So it's definitely worth putting it on there. But I mean, it just evolved. At first I went from recording the episodes in my car, editing it myself, trying to create a crappy thumbnail in Canva. Like this would take an hour to make a 15-minute episode. And finally, I slowed down in order to speed up. I put posts up on Upwork. I found virtual assistants. I did Zoom calls with them to tell them what I had ideas for. And now it's evolved where I just upload everything in Asana. I don't edit. I don't create the thumbnail. I don't even do the keyword research. It's all done for me. And all I do is like upload it into my YouTube platform and voila, all I have to do is jump on these calls, record it. My team does the rest, but it started off with me doing everything. So I would just encourage people to write down all the steps. Like, what is all the steps that you do? 15 steps, 20 steps. Now, the only main ones you need to do is jump on the call and hit record. Everything else can be outsourced.
Wow. That's amazing. Okay.
Thanks, man. I'm hoping that helps. So everyone taking notes, like write all the things you do down. A lot of times, like 80% of what we do, we don't have to always be doing ourselves.
So one of the other things you got me like for that, and when it comes to being able to reach out to some of the guests that you do now, is there like a specific way that you usually, when did you first start getting like some of like your bigger guests? And like at that point, were you still on your like on your own, or did you have teams at that point? Or it's just like, how did you have it set it up like to the point where it's originally when you had like that guest, like some of the first ones that were probably like bigger names, how were you able to present your podcast possibly if it wasn't already at the scale of the one that yours is like now? Like,
That's a good question, because it's like a chicken and the egg situation. It's tough because at first when you start, some people only want to be on shows that have like 50 plus episodes. I think Seth Godin, I remember hearing that's his criteria. He wants to know that you're going to actually have a show in 3 years, so he's not wasting his
right.
time on your first
Absolutely.
episode if you don't last past 3, right? So for me, I just did consistency over time, and then the numbers started to slowly grow. I was so excited when I hit 100 downloads a month, and then a year later I was at 19,000 downloads a month, and then the year after that with 38,000 downloads in January. Like I remember it went from 130 to 19,000 to 38,000, and it was just starting to become more consistent. And occasionally I would just DM somebody, they might put it on their story, someone that I follow, like, hey, I'm looking to get on 50 podcasts this year. If you have a podcast, DM me. And I would just DM them a screenshot of my stats to show them like, look, I've got, 400,000 total downloads or whatever the number was. I do 2 episodes a week, 80 episodes in, I'd love to have you on the show. And they'd be like, okay, cool. Email my assistant at blah, blah, blah. I would do that. So a lot of it was just me DMing people on Instagram or people tagging me. If they have like someone they follow and they see that same thing, they'd send a story to me and be like, hey, Grant Cardone's looking to get on podcasts. And that ended up not working out. I was trying to get Grant on the show at one point. And
you'll probably get him if you didn't already.
I had someone who works at 10X over there. So like I probably could get him on the show. It's just been like, at this point, I have so many people I've been booking and conversations that like I don't even look or try anymore. It's like, hey, whatever's on the calendar, I'm going to do those calls. And my podcast manager does it all for me. I'm like, hey, find me cool guests, book me on their show, book them on my show. And I'm not going to be super picky and be like, no, it has to be Grant only. I'm like, I'm open to talking to people. And it's really cool because we have amazing conversations like this one right now. But yeah, man, just consistency. People want to know when they open your podcast, do you have 3 episodes? Like, do you only post every 5 months? Because that's not a show that I want to be on. Or have you been posting every week for the last 2 years, come hell or high water? That's a show that I want to go on because I know you're going to be doing that 3 years from now and it could blow up,
Right. Okay, awesome. Okay, let's see. When it comes to, let's say, does your project manager, is there like a presentation that you created for him to like kind of follow by any chance? Would you be able to maybe share an example of like the presentation where it's like a formula. Yeah.
Yeah, super simple. And I got to give credit to a guy named Zachary Babcock with the Underdog Empowerment Movement. I think I forget his podcast name, but Zach Babcock, he did this to me and it worked super well. He sent me an email. It could have been him, it could have been an assistant. I don't know. It was literally 2 sentences long, like, hey, man, I checked out your podcast. Looks like we both got shows. Um, I think we would vibe together well. Would you be open to doing a podcast swap? So it wasn't one of these like super spammy looking 5 paragraphs. Like no one wants to read that. I don't want to read the whole story and what business you started. We're all busy. We all get a lot of emails. So that really stood out to me that it was short to the point. I could read it in like 3 seconds. And I'm like, yeah, I looked at his website real quick. He had a podcast. He actually followed the guidelines that I told you. He had been doing it for some time. And I'm like, okay, this works. We jumped on a call. We both interviewed each other. And he was a cool dude, and we stay kind of connected, from afar virtually. And so that's what I told my assistant. I'm like, hey, here's this template this guy emailed me with. Let's use that. And she just pretty much sends that out like, hey, so and so, my name's G Bell. I'm Chris's podcast manager. Chris has a podcast. You've got one. I think you'd be a great fit together. Would you be open to a podcast swap? Literally like 1 or 2 sentences, talk about me, maybe throw my one sheet on there so they can see my bio and see like, okay, I'm legit. I've been doing this for some time. This isn't like I just started my podcast. Can I have you on? It's like, no, I've been doing this. Do you want to be on and join me for the ride? So that it's super simple. That's it. That's the script. Hey, I've got the show. We're 300 something episodes in. I see you also have a show. Would you be open to a podcast swap? Yes or no? And maybe 5 people out of 10 don't reply. All you need are the 5 that do, right? And that's it. That keeps the engine turning.
And then perfect. Yeah. Got it. And then for, let's say, like when it comes to just guests, is there like a particular like way that you would find guests in the past, like maybe through hashtags or?
Man, there's so many podcasts out there, and I feel like there's just more and more coming up, right? Everyone's starting a podcast. So before I had a form on my website, people could submit, and it was just too many emails and like people pitching me who didn't even have like a legit website or anything. And I'd have a question on there like, hey, do you have revenue? Are you pre-revenue? And like most people hadn't started anything yet. And so I'm like, I can't interview them because they're not an expert. They don't have a website. They don't have a business. They're just thinking of ideas right now. Like, that's great. We were all there at one point, but I want to connect with people who are where I want to be to learn from them instead of having people on the show that don't necessarily know what they're doing just yet. Cause then like, we can't get as much value. We can get value from everyone, but like, you have to prove yourself first in a way, right? You got to earn it. You got to earn the right to share your story so that people are inspired and want to take action. So I honestly got overwhelmed with that. And then I handed it off to my podcast assistant and was like, look, following the same criteria, if someone asks me to be on the show, just check a couple things. Do they have like 50 plus episodes? Do they have like 4.5-star review and above? Like, I want to go on good shows that people like. Or I kind of I let her do a judgment call, right? She might send something and ask, hey, Chris, is this a good fit? And I'll glance around, if I don't see a website, if there's no proof of them being around for a long time, it kind of raises some red flags, like they have 2 posts on Instagram, usually not a good sign. But now she handles it and she's done a really good job. And if there's ever a podcast I go on where I'm like, I don't know if that was a good fit, or, that last guest we had just didn't have a lot in common, we'll tweak the process from there. And then she'll update her checklist. So that's kind of how it works. And if your assistant does it 80% as good as you would do it, it's worth it to just delegate it. That's what I found. So I don't even look at it anymore. She does it all for me. I just show up for the podcast and I count that as a win for my day.
That is amazing. Okay. Um, and then let's say for like when it comes to real estate wholesaling, and then we could just like maybe wrap it up if that's fair. I probably have more questions about afterwards.
That's cool, man. Yeah, I gotta like rinse off real quick. I just got back from the gym before my massage because I want to be all
That's
stinky in there,
awesome. Heck yeah,
Life
man.
by design. But yeah, let's go. A couple more questions. I'm good for it.
Okay. Thank you, by the way. When it comes
Yeah.
to, let's say, when you're pretty much like doing the wholesale, what are a couple of like, I guess, hiccups or challenges that you maybe had early on? Because I pretty much have these properties. I'm gonna comp them out later today. Probably like after this, you get me shortly, and then I'm gonna have to just give them a call because I already have their information. What are like I guess traditional like hiccups and challenges? One of the hangups that I had, I'm just like, how do I handle the equity thing? I was thinking like if they owe money on the house or if they have insurance or whatnot. Cause
Yeah. So to
yeah,
handle that, I mean,
yeah, and I
it
have a
just
title
starts with a
company, my buddy
conversation.
Brad. Yeah,
Yeah, if you got a title company, I mean, there, you can kind of piece it together, and it does help on the first few deals if you can partner with someone. They call it joint venture. Maybe ask around in some Facebook groups, see somebody who's credible in the market who can help. Because I hear this all the time. Like wholesaling is simple, but it's not easy. Like the steps you could list it in 4 or 5 steps, but I mean those are very difficult sometimes. The part that I see people get hung up on, they don't know what the comps are. Like that's kind of hard. Usually you got to have MLS access, or I hear a lot of people use PropStream to get the data on the comps. Because like if you think it's worth 400 grand ARV after repair value, and it's really worth 300, like you're already off at a losing start because you're going to offer them too much. And any competent buyer that you try to flip it to, you're gonna be like, hey, I got this under contract. I'm trying to sell it for 420. They're gonna look at the real comps and be like, dude, this is worth 320. Like I'm gonna offer you 315. And you're under contract with the seller at 400. That's already off to a bad start because that seller, in their mind, they're gonna think they're getting 400. And now they're gonna be real pissed when you try to drop it 75K and they're gonna go find somebody else. So that's one thing, is not knowing the numbers. Just having the conversation though goes a long way. Just casually ask when you're talking to them, hey, so I know you want to sell this property that you own on 123 Street. How long have you guys lived over there? Get some details. Oh, we moved 3 years ago. It's been vacant for 2 years. People keep breaking in. It's been a real pain, and you're like, ooh, okay, this sounds like there's some motivation. Now, how long have you owned the property, and like, do you know the payoff amount? And they'll be like, yeah, I think I owe like $65,000 on it. And by now you already did your research before you call them. The ARV is 200 or 300K. So you're like, okay, there's equity here. And then maybe you throw in, maybe it needs like $60,000 or whatever the estimate is, which is another number that beginners mess up at because they don't really know. They're like, it needs 10 grand when really it needs 80. So you got to know the ARV, the after repair value, and a really good estimate of the repairs, which just takes reps. Or if you know somebody who knows what they're doing and they can partner with you, boom, they can take care of that for you. But yeah, just have that conversation. You can get a sense of motivation very quickly. If they're like, I'm not selling it a penny below 150K, then you know that they may not be motivated, but maybe they're holding out. Just keep talking, keep asking questions. And then maybe 2 sentences later, they drop the fact that they haven't made payments on it in 3 months and they're about to get foreclosed on. And you're like, well, you're going to have to take less than 150K unless you want to get $0 for it. So hopefully that kind of helps. But I mean, just approach it like a regular person, ask questions, be inquisitive, and then you can kind of sense any motivation, and then just ask the payoff question, like casually, just as if it's something you do on every call. Hey, what's the payoff amount? Do you happen to know how much you guys owe on the mortgage? And just pause. And they're not going to be like, that's none of your business, or I'm offended. They're going to be like, I think it's like $70,000. They're going to tell you.
got it. Perfect. And then when it comes to like foreclosure properties, I was knocking doors and this guy let us into his house. He was like a veteran, I believe, gave us water and everything. And very interesting story. But when he was he's actually in the process of getting like foreclosed on. But I'm like, I might be able to help you out with that. I think he was in just so much pain that
Yeah.
he was in so much pain that he
Some
was like
people just let it go.
desensitized. Yeah, I'm just like, like I might be able to help you out. Um, so it's just, what do you do in situations like possibly like that? You get me? And I was in person with the fellow, with the fella.
Yeah, I've seen stuff like that too. And a lot of times people just bury their head, right? They don't handle stress or anything very well. And they try to ignore the problem until it's too late. And then they lose their house and get nothing for it. So the script I always use, especially if they have some equity in it, is just like, hey, look, sir, I want to help you. If you get foreclosed on, it ruins your credit for like 7 years and you get nothing. I can help you get rid of this problem property where you get to walk away, your credit doesn't get damaged, you have cash in your pocket to go rent somewhere or start over, and you kind of paint that picture of how it's going to be when this problem is done. And so that helps them get away from the pain and towards the pleasure of that ideal outcome. And you can't help everybody, right? Some people are just going to bury their head in the sand until it's too late. But if you can convince them, like, look, I want to help you. We've probably got a couple of weeks before this thing goes to foreclosure. When's the foreclosure date? You can find, partner with a cash buyer, say, hey, I got this foreclosure deal. It's a really good deal, but we got to close this week. Like, can we make it happen? And that's where the magic can happen. The buyer can get a good deal. You can get a good wholesale fee or split an assignment fee of some sort. That person gets helped out because now they're not getting foreclosed on. So really, I would just try to come to terms with them and just convince them that you are genuinely willing to help them, and that ignoring this problem isn't going to make it go away. Like, there's a countdown timer, and the end of that isn't a very pretty picture. And so you're able to help get them out of that situation.
Got it. Wow. That's helped out a lot, and I know if I replay it, it's going to be amazing. Not just for
Thank you,
the
man.
audience, you get me. And subscribing to Chris's podcast now, Chris Bello, and then underscore. That'll be his Instagram. So you can subscribe, and everything else is just going to be like at the link as well. So you could just be able to just
Cool.
click it, and you don't even have like to type it in, and then you could just you can subscribe to his Instagram, to his podcasts. I'm gonna get all your other links and stuff. I'm gonna organize them for them in ease to them, since I know you didn't charge them anything, or we didn't charge them anything, and it was just a lot of valuable information for the guests from a trusted source. So
Thank you.
yeah, when it comes to, I guess, like the wholesale, is that pretty much just like most of it, like just having the contracts, having the title company, and then some of those questions you get me to be able to, I guess like gauge where they're like standing, and then the mortgage a lot of the time, depending how much they owe, you could just tie that in, you get me, to like the ARV cost, right? I'm sorry, not the ARV, because the repair costs, right? Like, we have this property here, it's worth 400K or 350K. Let's share. The buyer, you get me, owes 40K. It needs about, let's say, 30K in repairs at 70K. And then they are willing to sell it for, like, let's say 125K or 150K. And then that's how it would work, right?
Yeah. So there's like a little bit of a equation behind it. And I've been doing more realtor stuff lately. So I know the market has shifted and people are willing to squeeze the margins. Buyers are willing to pay more. But from whenever I was doing it heavily a couple of years ago, the formula was like 75% of ARV minus repairs. So say you think it's worth 400K fixed up, you multiply that by 75%, you already got to be at 300K. And say it needs 60 grand in repairs, you got to be at 240. And so if they owe anything more than that 240 number, it's going to be tough because they're literally going to have to bring money to close. But say they only owe 50,000, you subtract out, what they owe, and there's $190,000 of wiggle room. So I know I said a lot of numbers there, but if you just play it back when you're listening to the audio, it'll make more sense than
Right.
just like pull up the calculator on your phone, because that's what I was doing. So that's where the magic happens: is what it's worth. You have a good estimate of what it'll cost to fix up. You know what their payoff amount is, and it's lower than those numbers. So 75%
Wow.
of what it's worth fixed up minus repairs. If you can get it lower than that, you've got even more margin in there. And just play with the numbers. Maybe you've got a buyer who's willing to pay a little bit more. Or if your buyer's willing to pay around where you've got it at, you got to renegotiate with the seller to drop the price by 5 or 10 grand. So you have room for your assignment fee. So it's just a trial and error. The more you do it, the more confident you'll be, and you'll be able to talk to these people and help them get out of their problems while also making good money doing it.
Wow, that's a beauty.
Mic
Um,
drop.
I mean, heck yes, you get me. If I had sound effects, I would put through the sound effects.
Thanks.
What would be, I guess, like, maybe five, like, what would be a couple of like success recipes that you would like, I guess, finish off with, like, similar to like Napoleon Hill, how you would organize his philosophy, maybe through like a sequence, you get me, a syntax, just a sequence. What would be, I guess, like some like formulas that you've been able to over the years, you get me, really like just put together, that have really worked out for you. You get me, whether it's maybe just certain phrases that you share to yourself, like habits, practices, um, like mindsets, philosophies, and then just like maybe in like 5 of them, like 10 of them, like if it, yeah, like
Yeah,
kind of like if a company when they have like when they walk in where it's just like not so much the mission statement, but here's some of like our values. You get me? That are like really really good, and you know treat the customer wonderfully, so that they can bring their friends back to you because of the experience that they told them about, because of you know that they had with you, and they came because of the last guy. So it's just like
for sure.
how right from like Chris Bayos,
Yeah, so
if you
I'd say like the
please.
golden rule. The golden rule obviously is important. Treat others as you'd want to be treated. That goes for everything. If you just treat people like a human, not like they're a number. People want to know like, hey, they're heard, they're felt, or you can tell that their emotions. You're willing to help them. You're not just there for the money. That always goes a long way in getting you referrals and more business. But I'd say just like maybe like 3 steps that I follow is getting very clear on what you want, because that's like the number one thing. Most people don't know what they want, and then they try a million different things, and then they don't make any money, and they have to go back and live with their parents or whatever, right? Because like they're trying too many things at once. So first thing is get clear, get very focused, read the book The One Thing, that talks about that. Like, he who chases two rabbits catches neither. That's a really powerful quote. And once you do that, I'd say the second step would be to set measurable goals. Don't be like, I want to make $1 million this year. You got to be like, how many phone calls am I going to make? Like, track the inputs. How many people am I going to talk to? How many events am I going to speak at? How many podcasts am I going to do to therefore take me closer to that goal of making however much I want to make this year? So that would be really important, to set some goals. And then third, I'd say get accountability partners. If you can meet with someone every week or every 2 weeks and hold each other accountable, that has helped me push myself so far, because I got a friend I meet with every 2 weeks. And at the end of every call, we just set 2 or 3 goals that we want to accomplish by the next time we talk. And man, so many things that I have now, my assistants, like the podcast automation, living in Denver, closing deals anywhere I want to. Those things happen from those little 2 week goals that we set, where I was like, okay, I'm going to interview in a virtual assistant by next time. And I did. And now I have the main assistant who is now my podcast manager. So those are the steps. And I actually just created this. I don't know if you saw it on my story. I created like a free scorecard to measure all these things. And I've been using it for a couple of years, but like I really dialed it down. So if anyone's interested in getting that, you can go to Chris Bello or chrisbayo.com/free. So chrisbello.com/free will take you there, and you can download the actual scorecard file. It has like 1, 3, 5 year goals. It has your daily critical tasks. Like, once you determine what's your goal, you got to break it down into measurable activities that you're going to do every single day. And this helps you track it all. And I've been using it every single day. Yeah, it takes you to lifeautomationacademy.com. It's a game changer. I've gotten really good feedback from everyone who's used it so far. And I am a little bit of an Excel nerd, so I made all the formulas in there. I think it looks pretty fancy. And I'm very sure that most of your audience, if they go use it, they're going to find a lot of value. And my goal is for them to start using
I
that
know I
every
love
single
your
day.
account. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, that's it, man. I mean, make it simple. Don't make it too many steps. Even 10 steps is too many. You're overcomplicating it, right? I'd say 3 steps and you're good. Just play those steps back, get that scorecard or life tracker that I call it, and know what you want, because that's number one. If you don't know what you want, you're going to be all over the place.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Chris, by the way. I really appreciate you. My gosh, the gems of wisdom that were just like implanted, like every single step being, like every word was intentional, like, which is amazing.
Thank you.
I think you broke up, like, so just thank you
I
a lot. You get
appreciate
me?
that.
Absolutely. Is there any way that I guess you want to wrap up the episode by any chance? Very happily.
Yeah, I would just say less dreaming, more doing. That's my tagline. Stop thinking about it and planning and taking a million notes and reading all the books. Like, just read, implement, learn something, implement, listen to a podcast, do something today. Stop waiting, stop gathering all the information, start taking action. That's how I'd like to leave it. Do something today.
Perfect. All right, guys. Thank you so much for stopping by. Make sure to
Thank you.
follow Chris Bello _ Chris Bello _ Are you Hispanic by any chance or no?
Half. Yeah, my mom's Mexican.
That is amazing, by the way. Both my parents are Hispanic, so I was like, is he? I'm not sure if he is. You got me.
Sweet.
But we'll catch you
Yep,
guys on the
half and
next
half,
one.
half Indian, half Mexican.
Oh, that is super cool. Oh my gosh,
I know.
it is. This stud. You're gonna make beautiful babies with your spouse now.
Thank you.
Congrats.
Appreciate you having me on the show, my friend. It's great to connect with you today.
Goal of mine in the future now. Uh, a lot of the success that not only you've accomplished in like so many different areas, but all that you got me with the highest and like the best regards. So thank you so much, Chris. Guys, make sure to subscribe to Chris's
Thank you.
podcast. He's got millions and millions and millions of people that are already checking it out. Go ahead and check it out. Thank you so much for stopping by. And this is just Life by Design. Thanks, guys.